The hunt for Ted Bundy, how charm and chaos kept a killer on the loose. Ted Bundy, a name that still sends shivers down the spine decades after his horrifying crimes. Once described as charismatic and intelligent, Bundy turned those very traits into weapons, using them to manipulate, deceive, and murder. This is the story of how Ted Bundy managed to evade justice for so long, and the chilling descent that brought his reign of terror to an end. Ted Bundy wasn't the shadowy figure lurking in dark alleys. He was the man sitting next to you in the library or holding the door open at the grocery store. Clean-cut, polite, and articulate, he was the opposite of what most imagined a serial killer to be. Bundy cultivated a trustworthy image, one that allowed him to get close to his victims without raising suspicion. But beneath the carefully crafted facade was a predator. Bundy's charm was his most dangerous tool, a disarming cloak that allowed him to operate in plain sight. His victims, all young women, fell into his trap because he appeared harmless. Ted Bundy's killing spree began in the mid-1970s, targeting women in Washington and Oregon. His methods were disturbingly calculated, choosing victims who resembled each other and using his charm to lure them into vulnerability. Yet, as the bodies began to pile up, local law enforcement had little understanding of the menace they were dealing with. At the time, communication between state and federal law enforcement was disjointed. Patterns that spanned state lines were difficult to identify, creating gaps in the investigation. With no central database or coordinated effort, Bundy exploited the silence between agencies, slipping farther out of reach every time he moved locations. Bundy's ability to evade capture wasn't just luck, it was calculated. He shifted his operations across state borders to confuse investigators and avoid leaving a recognizable pattern. From Washington, he moved on to Utah, Colorado, and finally Florida, trailing violence and heartbreak in his path. Wherever Bundy went, he adapted. He changed his methods, altered his appearance, and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. His intellect and ability to read people gave him a sinister edge, but it's also where we see one of the early systemic failures, the lack of centralized data sharing. Local agencies couldn't connect the pieces, and Bundy took full advantage. Bundy's overconfidence and insatiable appetite for control eventually became his Achilles heel. In 1975, he was arrested for a traffic violation in Utah, but when police searched his car, they found burglary tools and suspicious items linked to disappearances in the area. Yet, even then, his charm prevailed. He denied involvement in the crimes, convincing many of his innocence. This arrest marked a turning point, but it wasn't the end of his terror. Bundy's story would become even more chilling after his first taste of incarceration. On multiple occasions, Bundy achieved what most prisoners could only dream of: escape. The first was in 1977 when he jumped out of a courthouse window during a routine legal proceeding in Colorado. He was on the run for 6 days before being recaptured. But Bundy's most notorious escape came later that year. In a horrifying twist, he managed to saw a hole in the ceiling of his jail cell, starving himself to fit through the narrow space. He walked out of prison and vanished. What followed was a shocking spree of violence. After his escape, Bundy resurfaced in Florida, far from the states where authorities tracked his past crimes. In January 1978, Bundy unleashed his full savagery at Florida State University's Chi Omega sorority house. In a matter of minutes, he brutally attacked 4 women, killing 2 and injuring the others. The brutality of the attacks shocked the nation. By this point, Bundy's name and face were becoming widely recognized, but his ability to evade capture further cemented him as a terrifying figure. Bundy's continued freedom highlighted glaring weaknesses in law enforcement at the time. His crimes stretched across multiple states, yet the lack of communication between jurisdictions allowed him to operate with impunity. Profiling techniques were still in their infancy, and there was no standardized process to link crimes across state lines. Bundy exploited every loophole. Each new location gave him a clean slate to work from, leaving investigators scrambling to connect the dots. Bundy's arrogance ultimately led to his downfall. In February 1978, soon after the Chi Omega attacks, Bundy was pulled over by police in Florida while driving a stolen car. This time, Bundy couldn't talk his way out of trouble. Evidence from the vehicle, combined with eyewitness testimony, linked him conclusively to the Florida murders. Finally, the Bundy nightmare would come to an end. Arrested and unable to slither his way out of justice, Bundy faced charges for his gruesome crimes. Ted Bundy's trial was unlike anything the American public had ever seen. Bundy, ever the showman, represented himself in court. His charisma and legal knowledge turned the trial into an unsettling spectacle. Bundy smiled and charmed the media, portraying himself as a victim of a miscarriage of justice. But behind the theatrics, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Bundy's teeth marks were matched to bite wounds on one of the Chi Omega victims, a chilling piece of forensic evidence that sealed his fate. In July 1979, Bundy was convicted of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. He was later convicted of additional murders in Florida. The long journey to justice was over, but only after an incomprehensible toll of death and destruction. Ted Bundy's execution in 1989 brought closure to some, but his legacy remains a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind even the most harmless faces. Bundy's case changed American law enforcement forever. The failures in communication and profiling highlighted by his spree led to reforms. Systems like the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, emerged, creating centralized tracking of serial offenders. The Bundy saga serves as both a true crime fascination and a cautionary tale. It's a reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight and how trust can be weaponized by those who seek to harm. Ted Bundy's story is terrifying, not just because of his crimes, but because of how long he managed to evade capture. It's a reminder of the dangers of superficial charm and the importance of vigilance. The victims, the lives stolen too soon, must remain at the heart of this story, a tribute to those who didn't receive the justice they deserved during Bundy's reign. And as we reflect, Bundy's legacy is clear. Evil often hides behind the most unexpected masks. What do you think allowed Ted Bundy to evade capture for so long? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more chilling stories from Evil Unmasked. Stay tuned for our next video, where we explore another dark and mysterious case.